A few months back, I moved in a town in the southern part of the United States. I moved to this town since it was much closer to my job. I work at a storage facility warehouse that lies between the nearby major city and this other town that I moved to. My options for residence were either in the city, which wasn't something I'd enjoy or search for, since I disliked the city. The constant sound of construction, playing car horns, and barking dogs were not something I'd be interested in. A small southern town, somewhere quiet, sounded like a much more appealing place to live. While I was looking for a house for sale, my selection of houses was quite limited, as not many people here are looking to sell their houses. With that being said, there were only two houses that were up for sale. One of the houses was close to the center of town, though when I did my walkthrough of it, I was, well, let's just say I wasn't impressed. The other house, though, looked much more appealing, but the location wasn't the best. The house itself butted right up next to the one of many farms that dotted in the area, thus making the house seem more isolated. The rows of nearby cornfields created a sort of natural wall around the entire property. This was the first thing I noticed about the house as I pulled off the main road and onto the driveway. I never really enjoyed the thought of living out in the sticks, but tried to look at the bright side. The peace and quiet would be a big plus, as well as not having to worry about anyone bothering me. I met with the realtor, and after an hour or so looking at the house, I filled out the necessary paperwork, and by the end of the month, I had completely moved in. The house itself wasn't very large, and it was a basic single-story three-bedroom house. That being said, was more than enough for me, especially considering the fact that I live alone. Although the exterior of the house at a glance seemed somewhat weathered, the interior on the other hand was fully remodeled, which was a major selling point for me. I quickly got settled in, and before I knew it, the house began to feel like home. Days went by fast, seemingly melding into weeks. I have gotten myself into a routine which aided in the time progressing faster, and before I knew it, summer months seemed like distant memory. As the fall weather showed up, despite me living in the south, it was still on the northern end of the state, which resulted in cooler weather and fallen leaves. During autumn, I often thought back to my times as a child, running around on various customs, trick-or-treating with friends, and shoveling mountains of candy in my mouth. The 1st of October had arrived, and I was on my way home from work when I spotted something odd regarding my neighbor's farm. It seemed like the owners were having some sort of bird problem, as a newly placed scarecrow loomed partially above the cornfield. I could just vaguely make out the outline of a body suspended in the air as the headlights of my truck passed over it. Looking out of my passenger side window, I could still see the dark outline of the scarecrow in the distance. As I glanced at the scarecrow, I could swear for the briefest of moments that I saw it move slightly. When I refocused my eyes, however, it seemed stationary. I figured that work had simply taken its toll on my mind. I arrived home not long after and called it a night. The next morning, when I was walking to my truck to head to work, I looked towards the cornfield, and I could see the scarecrow much more clearly now that the sun shone down on it brightly, despite the cloudy and overcast sky above. It was quite a distance away from my house, so I could only see the upper torso through the cornfield. What I could see of it seemed quite ragged, as if someone had taken decades-old clothes and aimlessly sewn them together. Straw shot up and out from its neck and wrists, giving its silhouette a jagged appearance. I couldn't exactly make out what its face looked like though, since I had no time to further examine it and I had to leave for work. A week had passed by without an issue, and each day, as I head out to my truck, I'd spot the scarecrow still and silently doing his job. Even though the scarecrow had been out there for a couple of days, my mind thought back to earlier, and I hadn't noticed any birds around the crops themselves.
It seemed like the scarecrow wasn't necessary, or maybe it was just really good at scaring birds away. Another consideration came to mind was that maybe Halloween decoration, though I doubt any kids would come by and trick or treat around this area. About a week and a half ago, I had noticed something strange about the scarecrow. I had the day off from work, so I spent that time doing chores and generally cleaning up the house. When I took the trash outside, I saw that the scarecrow had gotten significantly closer to my house. It was so noticeable that it took me by surprise when I saw it. It was now nearly on the edge of the cornfield. Now I wondered if my neighbor had moved there for some reason. I wandered over the edge of the cornfield, where the scarecrow was perched up, and scratched my chin as I stared up at it. I could see the face much better at this proximity. It had a brown burlap sack as a head, with roughly stitched X's for eyes, and a small slit at the bottom, where seemed to be its mouth. Overall, it didn't really seem like whoever made this put any effort into it. I then turned to walk away from it, and just as my head turned to face away from it, I heard the crackling sound of twigs behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks and turned around, but the scarecrow just sat there, motionless. I kept a constant watch on it as I made my way back to my house. 5 days ago, I was driving home after a late shift. As I rounded the corner onto my street, I could already see the cornfield growing in the distance. The entire field seemed to sway like the grass would on a windy day. As I drove, I would occasionally take glances towards the field to see if I could spot the scarecrow, but I couldn't. As I pulled into my driveway, I angled my truck so the headlights would face the fields in attempts to see if the scarecrow was actually gone, and much to my surprise it was. I figured that maybe my neighbor had taken it down for some reason. As I sat there staring into the empty cornfield, I thought I could see some corn swaying more than the rest, but I quickly disregarded it and went inside. 2 days ago is when something completely unexplainable happened. I had yet another day off from work. This time, instead of spending the day doing chores and cleaning, I spent the majority of the day watching movies and television. And before I knew it, once morning sun had changed the sky into a dark radiant shade of orange. As I sat on my sofa after a break of watching movies, I thought I heard a noise coming from my backyard. I got up and walked over to my back door and peeked out of one of the windows. My eyes grew wide as I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Standing in the clearing of my backyard was that scarecrow. How was it standing on its own two legs was beyond me. Its feet were turned out the sides while its knees were slumped together. Its shoulders dropped down to lifeless-like arms, which dangled at its sides. Its head was slanted to the right, as if it had no support from its neck. I just stood there, frozen in fear and utter confusion, staring at it as the twilight sky had succumbed to the night. As soon as the last rays of the light faded in, I watched in horror as this thing started to twitch. Its body seemed to jostle and move slightly, like the oncoming night was doing something to it. I turned away from the window for a moment to make sure my back door was locked. When I glanced back through the window once more, it was gone. I scanned as much as I could of my backyard with the little light outside, jolting my head quickly from left to right. The scarecrow was gone. I stood out there trying to rationalize that my mind was playing tricks on me. That ever since I saw the scarecrow, it had been subconsciously stuck in my head, causing me to have some sort of hallucination. I sped walked through my house, double-checking to make sure all my doors were locked and windows tightly fastened. I could feel my body slowly starting to become tired and sluggish, and I decided that it was time for bed. Nearly 3 hours after I had fallen asleep, I was suddenly awoken by a noise coming from my kitchen. It sounded like something had gotten knocked off of my kitchen counter. I quickly sat up in a daze and walked into my living room. My legs stiffened as I saw the silhouette of a person standing in my kitchen. Once my eyes adjusted to the darkness of my house, I could see a bit of hay sticking out of its neck and torso. The scarecrow had gone inside of my house. I could feel my throat tighten and my hand become shaky as I stared, frozen in fear, as it took fast shoveling steps towards me. The crunch of hay under its weight made my skin crawl. As it approached, its mouth began to open. The small line that had been cut into the burlap seemed to extend. Inside was a swirling mass of worms and maggots that seemed to crawl out onto its face. Through the insects, I could see what vaguely resembled teeth. Though they were completely black and spaced apart, they kind of looked like shark teeth. It raised its slim arm towards me and continued its advance. As if my body were an autopilot, my legs seemed to slowly inch backwards. I wasn't sure what to do, as I couldn't even think clearly in the moment. Its gloved hands rested up on my shoulders, and it brought its open and small mouth right into my face, some of the worms and maggots spilling onto my face and chest. Feeling them crawling sent a jolt up my body, bringing my arms up to shove this thing away. When I did, it snapped its teeth at me like a snapping turtle. I braced my legs and pushed even harder, which broke me free from its grasp. I turned away from it and ran for the front door, making sure to grab my keys and wallet from the coffee table nearby. As I ran, I swatted off the bugs until I could no longer feel the prickly sensation of them crawling on me. I made it safely to my car, and when I started it, my headlights turned on. In the open doorway of my home, I could see that scarecrow still standing there, completely still. I backed out of my driveway and drove all the way into town. I found a hotel to stay at for the time being, and I've been there ever since. Yesterday I drove back to the house during the day to investigate. There was absolutely no sign of the scarecrow. Even the worms or maggot that were there once on the floor were gone. What was even more odd was when I inspected the back door. I found that the back door was still locked. Everything inside of my house was locked, aside from my front door, which I had unlocked to escape. I had no idea how that thing managed to get inside my house. I drove over to the neighbor's house shortly after, and an old man answered the door. I inquired about the scarecrow that he had put up in his field, though he only returned a confused expression. When I asked about it, he said he hadn't put any scarecrow in his field whatsoever. Completely confused and horrified, I apologized for bothering him and left. I'm not sure where the scarecrow came from or why it targeted me. If any of you out there see a random scarecrow in a field, leave it alone and get away as far as possible from it. I used to walk with her, now I walk alone. We used to marvel at the beautiful houses together. Now I look down on my feet, each home a grain of salt in the wound, each house a reminder of what I lost. Even though it hurts, I still find myself continuing our walks. Sometimes pain is good. I'd rather feel the pain of her passing than not feel her at all. She's alive when I walk. She's the shadow that strolls behind. Though I can't see her, I can feel her. Her presence is like windbreaker draped across my shoulders in a violent storm. The pain isn't gone, but it's bearable when I'm moving. I can't speak to her, but she's there. When I trip over a root, when I veer off course, I feel a gentle nudge, and every day I end up in front of the same house on Jackson Street. A grand home, at least one point it must have been. The windows are boarded closed, the doors locked. Beware trespasser signs are strewn hazardly across the tangled mess of the once impressive lawn. I feel her presence stronger here. It is almost tangible, as if she's hiding behind a thin curtain. I call to her. She never answers. I reach for her, yet I can never lay hands on her. It is here in my journey where my emotions get the best of me. Every day I come, every day I cry. The neighbors look at me with sympathy. But long gone are my days of caring what others think. I stand there an old man, face in my hands, and weep for the woman I lost. Let them think what they want, but my Lorne was worth every tear. I feel a tap on my shoulder, and I look up to see the front door of the house swing wide. Light is pouring out of it. And there she is, my Lenore. I rush towards her, and the gaping maw towards the woman I've lost, the woman who heard my cries and has returned for me. As I barrel forward through the brambles and overgrown weeds, I hardly am aware of the scrapes and cuts, nor does it bother me that I trip over a hidden bottle and go trembling face first in the dirt. I sling myself forward with the stamina of a much younger man, and then I'm there standing in touch distance from her. It's her. She's got the same strawberry blonde hair that always tended to leave me breathless. It's wrapped in a French braid with a daisy tucked behind her left ear. She looks younger by nearly 20 years. Her nose and cheeks are dusted with a fine layer of freckles. I began to giggle like a schoolboy, as I remember I once tried to count them. 23 is the highest I got before I found my mouth on hers. And suddenly I have an inappropriate urge to pull her close and continue the kiss in front of God and all the neighbors. Shortly before I just do that, she vanishes. She leaves me standing in front of the door, alone once more. I look around the hallway and notice it's fully furnished. There is no dust or decay. The parlor is in perfect condition. Even more shockingly, I hear someone playing the piano. It's Ferdley's, and I couldn't recognize that sound anywhere. Lenore was playing it the day she died. The Turkish rug leading down the hall looks familiar. The pattern of the wolf howling at the moon. The picture of the ship sailing in rough seas. I know it. I walk forward, no longer in control over my own body. Instead, everything began to flash in front of me like a movie. I see my own hands reach for a glided doorknob. I know on the other side of the door is a set of stairs that leads me to the great room. Still, I don't remember. I can't remember. They threaten to come back, but I don't let them. I don't want to remember. I'm back. Oh God, have mercy on me. I'm back to the day my wife died. I come to this conclusion as my own torturous hand throws wide the hallway door. I fight for control. I do everything in my power to not see. My eyes fling wide, and I look to see the back of my sweet Lenore's head. The damned daisy still perched behind her ear. She's playing, and she doesn't know I've arrived. I know what is coming, but I don't want to. Yet those damned feet, they keep pushing me forward. First up one step, then two, before I even know it. I've scaled half of them. Now I can see her back. She's in a florid dress with what looks to be hummingbird, sucking at that honey. Fur Elise is ramping up, and the song is nearly at its climax. And then I see it. Him, to be precise. He's lounging in my chair, drinking my whiskey, with his shirt particularly unbuttoned. Rage, white hot, fills me once more. I look to the left and then the right, and that's when I see my cavalry saber hung on the wall for decoration. I remember the outcome, yet I can't force myself to let go of its hilt. My hand turns white from grasping it too hard. There is nothing that I can do to lessen my grip. I see myself marching up behind her sword, held high in one hand. For Elise climaxes as my arm swings. I strike her left shoulder blade, and with discordant whine, the music stops altogether. Inwardly I scream. I curse my God's demand temper. I watch as she slumps out of her chair. Without a second glance, I'm charging the man just beginning to look up from his comfortable spot in my seat. My blade penetrates his right abdomen. He lets out a shriek before my second swing catches him directly in the throat. I'm appalled at the blood spurling from his nearly decapitated neck. My hands are scarred. I feel wet sickness oozing down my face, yet I can't control my own limbs as they swing and swing and swing, chopping the man into kittling. I try to close my eyes, but they won't, so I see his hand go flying. I watch his innards come bubbling out of his abdomen. I split his head like a grape, and watch his brain matter leak out of the side of it. To my dismay, I hear a gurgling sound coming from behind me. I turn knowing what I'll see, but powerless to stop it. I look to see my Lenore's face towards me trying to speak. Blood bubbles drizzling out of the side of her mouth. I don't need to hear the words to know what she's trying to say. Please, no more. Pity fills my heart, and my own eyes refuse to cry. Please don't do this. I scream at myself in vain. I watch as I slowly move towards my former wife, letting the blade carve a wicked groove into the marble floor. With no mercy, my arm swings the blade up, once, then twice, then 3 times, and all goes black. Finally, I regain control of my limbs and body. I look up to see a vandalizing great hall with a nasty groove in the marble floor, and there my chopped wife, laying on the floor, looking up at me with dead, yet still very much alive eyes. I see the monstrosity of my late wife clamber to her feet. Her left eye slides out of its socket, running like egg yolk down her face. Black puzzle blood leaks from her wounds. Her right eye locks with mine, and in a slobbering wet noise, she said, "I'll never let you forget what you did here. Jail wasn't enough for you. You didn't stay in your head. So even in your Alzheimer's, I won't let you forget. Sometime tomorrow, honey."
This was a crazy time that I'm almost positive I'll never forget. Me and my cousins Jay, Jarrett, and Anthony were celebrating Jarrett's birthday at a hotel. My niece's birthday was also around the same time, so they did 2 birthdays in one hotel. Me and my cousins, which were all boys, stayed in one room, and my niece and her friends stayed in another room. The rooms were very separated and were basically from one end of the hall to the other. Everything was going good for the first 2 hours, until stuff started getting a little weird. We got a phone call from in our room, and you could obviously tell it was my niece and her friends because they have similar voices, and it's easy to tell if it's them or not. They could also ding-dong ditch our door, but you could still tell it was them because they would loudly run away and laugh. But things started getting different, to where when they would knock on the door, they wouldn't run away laughing. It was very silent. They used to bang on the door when they would ding-dong ditch, but the knocks started getting quieter, and there was only 2 or 3 knocks instead of 100. It started creeping all of us out. Jay looked through the peephole, but no one was there. When we heard the quiet knocks again, he could also see the shadow feet at the bottom of the crack of the door. While the shadow was there, Jay sprung and looked through the peephole, but still, he saw no one. Then Jay told us a thought that creeped us all out. He wondered if the person that was still outside the door was ducking or was a ghost. It creeped us all out, and we tried to ignore it. We also called my niece to see if it was them outside the door, but they said they had stopped knocking on our door like an hour ago. Once my niece said that, all of our eyes widened. We all still tried to get our minds off of it by watching TV. We kept getting calls from different rooms that were completely random. All you heard was silence if you picked it up. The tiny knocks still happened about every 10 minutes or so. Finally, we were done with all this, and we packed up our stuff and called my niece and told them that we were gonna stay in a different room for a bit, and she said okay. She told us that once we got there, to knock so she could let us in. So we started heading to her room. You could hear people talking about stuff while walking past other doors, but once we got to my niece's door, everything went silent. We all looked at each other, but not a word came out of anybody's mouth. Anthony knocked on the door, and no one answered. We all looked at each other, but still not a word. Jay called my niece, but it went straight to voicemail. We all looked at each other again, but with much more shock, and not another word, but it felt like our mouths were frozen. Then the thing that scared us the most was when all the lights in the hallways were flickering 3 times. That's when we all ran back to our room.
Your mom got into a car crash. Those were the words I heard coming from my phone. In the empty school hallway, a cold wave traveled through my body, rapidly fast. My vision was starting to get blurry. My hearing got messed up until I heard the words, "Hey, what are you doing? Get back in my class." Everything suddenly became normal. I heard the words, "Sorry, Miss Smith," come out of my mouth forcefully. My legs started to forcefully walk into the classroom and sit down. After class, as I was walking out of the classroom and finally into freedom, Miss Smith stopped me and said, "Young man, remember you're on detention today." But Miss Smith, the words stopped coming out of my mouth, and finally I said, "Fine." At 3:15, I was already in detention, being tortured by boredom. After waiting for 2 hours, I was finally released. It was dark outside. Since it was winter, no one was on the streets. I was alone. I wanted to get this over with fast. I took a step, then another, and proceeded to walk faster. As I was walking past the old abandoned house, which kids were scared of, a hand grabbed my arm from behind and screamed, "Do you want to be happy?" I started to run in fear, and when I was looking back, I saw a humanoid being that was way too large to be human, with arms larger than myself. It started to run towards me. I also ran, but no matter how fast I was running, it was running faster. In the distance, I could see a car. I didn't care. I ripped the door open, sat inside, and screamed at him, "Drive!" The car drove and led me back to my house, even though I never told the driver where I lived. As I entered the house, I saw a depressed, human-like creature that I could identify as my dad, sitting on a chair that hasn't been seen before. I could see the last humanity my dad had left slowly started to fade. I asked him, "Is mom okay?" He didn't reply. He looked at me, and then he looked at his hands. At this state, I didn't dare to tell my dad what happened outside. I went to bed early and wished I wouldn't wake up the next day. As I entered the kitchen in the morning, I saw my dad going up white stairs that led to the ceiling and beyond. At the top of the stairs, I could see a little platform and a rope on it that was shaped into an oval form. I knew what would happen. I tried to not run up the stairs to save Dad, but I suddenly started to fall into emptiness. Was this a dream, or was this reality? I asked myself. I landed on a sideway beside my house, fully dressed and ready for the day. I saw a person walking toward me with a big, inhumane smile. His eyes were watery, and he was tall, like a humanoid creature. I started to walk towards him. It, it didn't stop walking either, and then it walked past me. I definitely didn't expect that. I didn't feel like going to school today, hence, I sat down on a bench near the abandoned house and waited. Days were passing rapidly. I think I was starting to get crazy. At this point, I was as depressed as a human can be. I begged for the creature to appear. It was my last hope. A psychiatrist wouldn't help. No one would. I needed the creature. At this point, I've been sitting on the bench for months now. Nobody come looking for me. My legs started to grow rapidly, as my arms. I started to become more like the creature. On day 345, I just had enough. I took a knife that had magically appeared in my pocket and started to carve a smile on my face. The knife made a move. It hurt. Then again, it made a move. Air started coming out through the cut hole. Then again. Then again. At some point, it started to hurt and gave me a dopamine rush. Each time the knife moved, I started to feel happy, but it all faded when I was done. I felt the same depression again. From this point on, I started to cut myself in different areas of my body. Each time I stopped, I felt the same depression again. On day 671, while I was cutting myself, I saw a little kid walk past the abandoned house. It was the first time since I saw a human life. While sitting here, I walked up to the kid and asked the same question the creature asked me 2 years ago. Do you want to be happy? My life was surprisingly loud, and the kid started to run. Was I really that ugly and terrible? I became angry and started to chase the kid. The kid screamed. This time, there was no car to help the kid. I grabbed the kid, ripped his little arms. I suddenly had the strong desire to taste the arms. Delicious. I saw the little pathetic kid trying to crawl away with just his legs. The little creature was so cute, I grabbed it and threw it into my very large mouth. On day 1961, I had run out of places to call my body. From now I had to switch to just eating. Every day suddenly, at exactly 4:34 p.m., a kid walked past the house. Each one of them shared the same faith. Look at me. I started to realize that I had become the large humanoid creature. What would have happened if that car had never saved me? What if I'm the monster now?